Hi, so I've been walking around my house rehearsing what I'm going to say in this video because I want to be really careful with what I say. I know what I'm in for. When you search into a Google search engine or a YouTube search engine, Ben Shapiro is wrong, you get like 4 videos, and all of them have more dislikes than likes. All I ask is for you to hear me out, because I am not claiming to be smarter than Ben or to be anywhere near as smart as Ben. I know that for a fact that I wouldn't be able to graduate cum laude from Harvard. I know that I wouldn't be able to write 7 books by the time that I'm 33, and I definitely did not skip any grades while I was in school. I'm a community college student studying psychology and political science with an IQ of 110, so keep in mind that I am not saying that Ben is intellectually superior to me, but I want to make this video anyway, because I'm argumentative as hell. So since I'm deciding not to bite off more than I can chew, I'm basically just critiquing what Ben said in a video. I think it's the most popular Ben Shapiro video that I could find, at least on this subject, which is, the title of it is called Ben Shapiro Destroys Transgenderism and Abortion. And I didn't watch the abortion half because I'm just going to be talking about the transgender part, but basically there's a girl who in the audience who wanted to question him and, talk to him about transgenderism, and I pulled some quotes from what he said, and I'm going to talk about why I disagree with him and what information I think that he is missing. So first he says, the idea that sex and gender are malleable is not true. Sex, obviously, is hardly malleable. Even if you get sex reassignment surgery and undergo hormone replacement therapy for 30 years, at the end of the day, at the end of your life, you will still be the sex that you were born as because you can't change your chromosomes. You are the sex that you're born as for the rest of your life. I'm not debating that. But in this, we're talking about gender, which, while it is closely related to sex, 99.7% of the time, it's not synonymous. They're not completely different things. Obviously, everyone should know that. Gender is not 100% subjective. Gender is not something that can change from day to day, but they're not synonymous. And I'll get into that. Then he says, I'm not denying your humanity if you're a transgender person. I'm saying that you are not the sex to which you claim to be. It is a good thing that he said this, because way too many people use that phrase, that you're denying someone's humanity by purposefully misgendering them. That is dehumanizing and a hate crime to misgender someone. That's ridiculous. As angry and emotional as I get when I see people purposefully and repeatedly misgendering a passing trans person, it's not that they're denying your humanity. Even though it may feel that way. That's not their intention, and intent matters. I don't think that Ben is a hateful person. I used to because of how angry he made me. But that hate was coming from me, not him. Here's the thing. In this quote, he claims that he refuses to address you as the sex that you claim to be if in reality you are not that sex. I'm not making that claim. I'm not claiming to be the opposite sex. I've already stated earlier that the sex that I was born is the sex that I'm going to die as. It's not a delusion. I'm not delusional that I am biologically male. I'm well aware that I'm not biologically male. In fact, I'm hyper aware of the fact that I'm not biologically male. I'm also hyper aware of the fact that I have very bad, crippling gender dysphoria. Not as much as I did before, because I pass now and I look more male and I am stealth at my workplace. My gender dysphoria is not something that can just be ignored, and it's not a delusion, because a delusion is a part of a psychotic disorder, and gender dysphoria is not a psychotic disorder. Sex is a scientific and objective concept. Gender is an abstract concept. It just is. There's really no way around it. So the way that I think of gender is that you have a box. Picture a box that says gender up here. And then there are 2 subcategories. One is gender roles, the other one is gender identity. Your gender roles partially have to do with your genetic makeup and your personality, and your gender expression is in the same category as gender roles. A lot of them are based on evolutionary psychology, but some of them are based on more trivial things. But you can play with your gender roles and still identify as the sex that you were assigned at birth. Gender identity, the way that I would describe that that is even more abstract than the already abstract concept of gender roles. But the way that I would describe gender identity is your ease or unease with the embodiment of a certain sex. It's a lot more than just not liking your dick or not liking your boobs. It has to do with your place in society, but more importantly, it has to do with your place in humanity. It's not something that you can really scientifically measure, but we've been working on that with several studies that are, showing the wiring and the amount of white matter in a cisgender female brain and a cisgender male brain. There needs to be more studies done on that. There needs to be bigger sample sizes, and we need to keep going with that because we are definitely getting somewhere. We're definitely finding things, but that kind of research has just started in the past 5-10 years or so. So you need to give it time before you just dismiss the whole thing. What I mean by your place in humanity, your place in your life, the way you are perceived by friends, family, strangers, coworkers, everyone in your life. And I know this is a very hypothetical situation, and it does have to do with emotions, sort of, but if you are a Ben Shapiro fan, I just want you to open your mind a little bit. If you are a boy, imagine that you lost an entire boyhood. Imagine that you were raised as a girl. And let's say that you liked to play in the mud and play video games and were rough with your friends and had all guy friends. Instead of your parents saying, "Oh, he's just a typical boy," they said something like, "Oh, she's a tomboy. She's different. She's a tomboy. If your name is Joseph, Nah, your name's not Joseph. Your name is Josephine. Everyone's gonna call you Josephine because of your delicate face, your high voice." Think back to puberty. Do you remember what was happening in your body? Your voice was getting deeper, you had acne. It was probably a really awkward time. Imagine how awkward it would be if instead of getting an Adam's apple and body hair and all that, you got boobs and wide hips. And imagine that this whole time, you were the same person that you are now. The exact same person, the exact same personality, the same head, just with a completely different body and a completely different place in society. But instead of a penis, you had a vagina. And everything else that comes with being a biological female. If you really think about it, if this were to happen to you tomorrow, would you just roll over and say, "Oh, well, biology says I'm female, so guess I better pick a new name, guess I better work on my social transition. This'll be a breeze for me. I don't feel uncomfortable with this at all." No, you would be wildly uncomfortable. And every single man and woman that I ask that type of question to usually runs away from it because of how uncomfortable it makes them. It's a very awkward situation to think about, but for transgender people, that has been our situation since we came out of the womb. Another popular claim from the right, which is trying to debunk transgenderism, or which is basically trying to debunk the concept that gender identity exists, is that it's influenced by the liberal media, that it's indoctrinating kids into thinking that they can just change their gender whenever they want. I have two examples that are contrary to that claim. One is the case of Albert Cashier. Albert Cashier was a transgender man, would have been defined that way today, almost certainly, who fought in the Civil War. Now, this wasn't just a Mulan situation where he dressed up as a man just so he could go fight for his country. He lived his life before, during, and after the war, up until the day he died. A few years before he died, his female sex was exposed to a doctor. The doctor wanted him to keep his dignity as a soldier, so he put him in a soldier's home. But with Albert's secret being out and with him showing signs of dementia, he was put in a mental hospital. And he was forced to be in the women's ward, and he was forced to be wearing a dress. While he was in this mental hospital wearing a dress in the women's ward, he would try to fashion his dress into a pair of trousers. Obviously, there was no liberal media that was promoting transgenderism in the 1860s. The term transgenderism wasn't even coined. If you had the idea that you were supposed to be a different gender, you would be thrown in a mental hospital immediately. It was not something that was accepted at all. No one even understood it. Another case of this is David Reimer. David Reimer was born intersex, but the doctor assigned him to be female. As he grew up, he was being raised as a female, but when he got older, he realized that he was supposed to be a man the whole time. He was so distressed over the fact that his penis was removed when he was an infant, and he was so distressed and depressed over his gender dysphoria and this horrible mistake that the doctor had made that he committed suicide. In my opinion, I personally think that those two cases are very strong when you're using evidence to argue that gender identity does exist, that there is something beyond just your genitals or just your chromosomes that make up who you are. Now to the part of the video where supposedly Ben had won the argument. A simple yet thought-provoking question that Ben asked this young woman was, if you are 22, why aren't you 60? Why don't you identify as 60? She was clearly taken off guard and wasn't sure how to respond to the question right away. And given the fact that she was already nervous, she couldn't really come up with an answer. And the fact that she couldn't come up with an answer made the audience laugh and applaud. So it seemed like Ben had won the argument. But I have never heard people really in-depthly describe the difference between being transgender and being trans age. And I'm about to try my best to do it. I thought about this for a really long time, actually. I mean, if you think about it, there are actually a lot of similarities between identifying with a different age and identifying with a different gender. There are societal roles that come with identifying with both. Like, you wouldn't expect a 20-year-old to act like a 6-year-old, and you wouldn't necessarily expect a 20-year-old to act like a 70-year-old. And one of the things I thought was that, well, age dysphoria isn't a thing, but then I realized that it very well could be. And then I realized that I've experienced it, and probably a lot of other people have experienced it. For example, when I was about 10 years old, I had been suffering with depression for about a year, and I had come to the realization that I was done being coddled. And it's funny hearing me say this, knowing that I was 10 years old, because I really had no idea how privileged I was at 10 years old. But I was rather spoiled when I was growing up. I basically just got stuff, and I didn't really have to work for it, and I sort of had this very distressing epiphany that as I continued to grow older, more and more responsibility would be put on me. And this was so distressing to me, someone who was very privileged their whole life in terms of how they were raised and their financial state. I didn't even care about finances when I was 10. I just started crying. I could not stop crying. Technically, I suppose I was feeling dysphoric about my age. And I'm sure lots of people have also felt that way. I mean, I really felt in that moment that I craved going back to being a 3-year-old. But in reality, trans age just isn't a thing. It's basically a joke. I mean, if you look up trans age, the only person that you'll get is Stephanie Walsh, and she's the laughingstock of the transgender community. Think about that. The laughingstock of the trans community. How do you achieve that? So the fact that trans age is not a thing, but transgender definitely is, and it is more socially acceptable to change your gender than it is to change your sex, I wondered, why are there so many similarities? And then I came to the realization that it was actually pretty obvious why they're different. There are certain types of reasoning and cognitive ability that don't develop in one's brain until a certain age. For example, Piaget's idea of formal operational reasoning typically does not develop until you're 11 or 12, and it continues throughout the rest of your adulthood, just getting more and more sophisticated. If a 50-year-old man identifies as being trans age 6 years old, he can't just go back to a time where his brain had not developed formal operational reasoning. Now, just like the studies that are coming out that transgender men may have brains that are similar to cisgender men, it is possible to have a younger brain, roughly speaking, than you actually have. And most of the time, if a part of your brain is not developing appropriately with how you're aging, you may be diagnosed with a cognitive disability. People with cognitive disabilities aren't trans age. If you have autism, you're not just going to go and live your life as the age that you act as. You're going to seek out help, and you're going to find resources such as CBT or exposure therapy, and I'm not just talking about autism at this point. I'm talking about any cognitive deficiency. You can take medication. You can do all of these things that help you live your life and to be a member of society with as little amount of difficulties as possible. In my estimation, if you allowed a child with autism to suffer and to stay at the mental age, I hate that phrase, I can't think of a different phrase to use, but if you allow them to portray themselves as, say, a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old, then that's not going to help them. But from what most people have found, yes, there are people who regret transitioning. I've read that it can be up to 20% of people who regret transitioning, and I'm terrified that I'll make that mistake, but so far so good. Most people, from what we have seen so far, are able to live their lives easier and happier after they have taken some steps to transition, after they have started to experience life as the gender that they always felt that they were. We haven't found any cure, we haven't found any pill that gets rid of gender dysphoria. I wouldn't be opposed to it as long as it wasn't manipulative or based in religion. Not that religion is a bad thing, but that's basically textbook conversion therapy, and that is usually very harmful. So, at the end of the day, transgenderism is still a very new topic, and we just need to wait and see how this all plays out before we determine what is the best solution to dealing with gender dysphoria. But the one thing, in my opinion, that is just self-evident is that gender identity exists and it is not synonymous with sex. That's the end of my video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Leave me a comment telling me that I'm wrong. Leave me a comment telling me that I'm a girl. Like I don't know already. I see it in the mirror every day and I'm pissed about it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.